Hey, what's up, guys? So, as you guys know, Escort recently came out with the Escort Max360. It's got a lot of their bells and whistles, right? You've got the arrows, you've got the fancy new display, you've got Escort's latest, false alert filtering technology, their new blind spot filtering technology. You've got GPS lockouts and low-speed muting. So you got a lot of cool kind of bells and whistles and false filtering stuff. But the Max360 does not have the best performance in the world. It's kind of getting its butt kicked lately in some of the most recent test results. On the other hand, you've got the Escort Redline. It's an older detector. They've been producing it for a number of years now, and this thing, in terms of performance, is a monster. It's basically the longest range windshield mount radar detector that you can get. There's some similar ones like the Radenso and the Magnum, of course, but that platform that's used in the Redline is phenomenal. So, when the Max360 came out, because it was based off the Max platform, people were kind of asking, what would happen if Escort combined the two detectors, right? Let's make a Redline360. Take the fundamental hardware platform, the antennas of the Redline, which have crazy awesome range, and give it a lot of the DSP and the software capabilities of the Max360, so you get the lockouts, give it the new display, give it a rear antenna, so now you can get arrows, make one ultimate super detector, That's kind of like the obvious no-brainer question. When the Max came out, or the Max360, tons of people were requesting it, and still, that's one of the biggest requests, is why doesn't Escort combine these two and just make the one super detector to end all detectors, right? And I think it's a great question. There's actually two reasons that Escort has stated why they're not doing it. So let's go into things into a little bit more detail here. So why wouldn't Escort do it, first of all? Okay, well, let's just say what the two reasons are. Number one, it would physically make the detector too large. And number two, it would make the detector too expensive to kind of use the M3 platform for detection range, and then the M5/M6 for filtering stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at those two now in more detail. So we're going to start first with size. Okay. So the Redline, the way that this guy works, the antenna inside it is actually pretty large. If you guys have looked inside any of the M3 detectors, you'll notice there's not one, but two different antennas, one for X-band, another one for K and KA. The horn in there, it's actually two pieces of metal sandwiched together, and it takes up almost the entire length of the inside of the detector. So there's not necessarily a lot of room left over for things like GPS and Bluetooth, and especially a rear antenna, It's already almost entirely used by just the horn. If we take a look, for example, on the other hand, at the Max series detectors, the horn inside the Maxes is actually quite tiny. If you look at the Max 2, the horn only runs maybe half-ish of the length of the detector, maybe a little bit more if you take a look inside. With the Max360, of course, they added the rear antenna, right? So what they did is for the rear antenna, they just, extended the length of the horn to add the second antenna pointing out the back. So now we have, a longer antenna, but there's more room because it's a smaller horn. You've got more room for things like a Bluetooth chip, a GPS chip, etc. Those things can be made really tiny. I mean, look at your cell phone. It's not like they're huge things, but nonetheless, they do take up some space, and there's quite a bit that's crammed inside the Max360. If you take a look at the two detectors, you'll notice, they're very similar, right? The Max 2, if you notice, it's kind of tapered toward the display, whereas the Max360 is a little bit boxier, and that's there because it's kind of, a similar front end with the same display, but they've had to make it a little bit wider to stuff the rear antenna. So that's why it's a little bit boxier and physically a little bit larger and heavier than the Max 2. So imagine now if we were to try to take the Max360, which is already pretty large, it doesn't look, excessively large or anything, but it's Escort's biggest and heaviest detector. Now, imagine if they tried to combine that with the Redline, which is already huge inside. Where would you stuff a rear antenna in this platform, There's not really room for all the other stuff, okay, maybe you can get away with the Bluetooth and the GPS, which would be awesome, of course. But the rear antenna, there's not really the room for it unless you kind of have to redo everything, So that's one of the biggest issues. And now I would accept that at face value if it wasn't for one thing, and that was the existence of this guy. Take a look at this tiny guy. This is the Radenso Pro Se. It's a tiny, tiny detector. However, it's going to offer you the performance pretty much on par with the Redline. That's amazing. It's a very compact detector. It's one of the tiniest out there on the market, and it's able to do high-end performance without a huge detector. That's very impressive. Now, this is not Escort's technology. This is, somebody else is producing one. So what we could say is, yes, it's definitely possible to do high-end performance without resorting to the huge platform of the M3. The M3 is a great platform for sure, but for Escort to do this, it would kind of require them to, abandon the M3 platform, abandon the M5/M6, and come up with something new altogether. So they would have to re-engineer something completely different. So if they were to stick with the M3, there's not really the room to, add the rear antenna and all that kind of stuff, right? But if Radenso, just for example, were to do it, I have no idea, I haven't heard anything, but if they were to do, a Radenso with arrows, that platform already has the size to add in the extra things. I mean, take a look at it. If we compare the Radenso to the Max2, this is going to be kind of one of the closest competitors in terms of features, right? They both have, one antenna. They've got GPS. This guy has Bluetooth. This guy doesn't, but I mean, the Max original one doesn't have Bluetooth. It's the same size, You've got your display, whatever. It's the same kind of, they're direct competitors. Except this guy is much tinier, and you've got higher end performance. So as you can see, it's definitely doable. It would just kind of require a mix. Different competitors, different brands, they have different technologies that they're using, right? So sticking with the Redline, yeah, with that platform, there's not really the room to do it. However, that doesn't mean that it can't be done. It's just a matter of does Escort want to, come up with a new platform altogether to give us high-end range? What they've basically been demonstrating so far is they don't really seem to be interested in that. They're kind of leaving their M3 platform in the dust. They're not really continuing to evolve it. It seems like they're mostly interested in the M5 and the M6 versions of their detectors. And the reason is that, they're more affordable. If you look at the horns, it's a very tiny package. Again, it's a small horn and it's one single piece. It's more affordable to produce. It helps with Escort's profit margins. And they're kind of sacrificing, to a certain extent, performance to give you the other bells and whistles and to make sure that they're, it's a profitable business for them. And of course, they have to stay in business. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the second half when we talk about the price point, right? But basically what Escort seems to be doing is they're focusing not so much on the M3 platform of the Redline and whatnot, but kind of on their newest one and really pushing the whole DSP and, all that kind of stuff, more of the software improvements that they're making versus focusing on the hardware. So yes, I do think it's possible, but not so much with the M3 platform, just due to the size of the horn is so big, So that's size. Now, their other reason for not wanting to do it is just cost. If we take a look at the cost of these different detectors, this guy retailed for $500. They've since actually raised the MSRP of it to $550. This guy retails for $650. So they're already pretty expensive detectors, right? If we were to take this guy and give it a more expensive horn, that would raise the price of this guy. If we were to take a $550 Redline and then we add GPS and Bluetooth, I know they're not, expensive chips. I mean, probably cost a couple bucks at most to put in. The chips themselves are not that pricey, But nonetheless, if Escort was to kind of come out with a new model, I mean, look at the Max and the Max2. It was the same freaking detector, but they put Bluetooth in it and charge an extra $50, So, if they were to start adding a whole bunch of stuff to it, chances are it would probably be an $800 detector. So the thing is, with Escort, they're kind of wondering, from what they've said, from a business standpoint, it wouldn't make sense to sell an $800 detector, and that's probably the other reason that they're saying, from what they've shared with us of why they don't want to do it, is just because it would be too expensive of a detector. Let's talk about next price point, and to illustrate that, we're going to be talking about the Uniden LRD950. So you guys know this detector. We've talked about it all the time. When this detector first came out, it retailed for $400. It sounds like Uniden didn't stick to the whole minimum advertised price thing, and different distributors and retailers, it kind of became a race to the bottom, to where now you can find it online easily for less than $200. This detector is able to outclass this detector. You're going to get better range with the Uniden than you will with the Max360. The false alert filtering here works better. You've also got your GPS lockouts. I mean, so you've got better performance, better filtering for a fraction of the price. Again, you can find this guy for less than $200. This guy you can find for $650. So you really have to ask yourself, like, how bad do you want those arrows? How much do you want Bluetooth built in? Like, how much do you want the fancy display or the lockouts to be automatic instead of manual? Like, yes, there's definitely still benefits to this, but is it worth $650 when you can get this guy for less than $200? So, it's a really interesting question now. Like, it's becoming harder and harder to justify this guy when this guy is out. Now, that said, Uniden is discontinuing this. Again, they wanted to sell it originally at $400, and the price has kind of dropped quite a bit since. And because the price now is so low, less than $200, what Uniden is doing is they're going to be discontinuing this guy, repackaging it, and coming out with a new version that, from what people have been saying, it's going to be sold at $300. And, a radar detector company has to make a profit in order to continue doing business, right? Like, obviously, it's a business. It has to be a profitable venture in order for them to be successful and continue making these radar detectors for us in the first place. So the companies, the manufacturers, they have to be profitable and successful, and I totally get that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Everybody's got to make money. Cool. It sounds like a better price point for the Uniden now is going to be $300. So with that said, I mean, even $300, this guy is outperforming the Max360 in some of the recent tests. He's beating the V1. Like, okay, it doesn't have quite the range of the Redline, for example, but you do have the improved false alert filtering. You got the GPS lockouts and low-speed muting, and you've got the red light camera. So it's got a lot of the GPS stuff that isn't available here, but it doesn't have quite the performance of the Redline. So there's no detector that's kind of giving everything to us in terms of, I want long distance range, and I want, the lockouts, and I want a low price, and I want, maybe how about automatic lockouts, and I want arrows, and I want everything, There's no detector that's giving us everything. Maybe the one exception is going to be the Stinger VIP. That can give you the performance of the Redline and then some, and it's got some of the best false alert filtering on the market too. And if you add a rear antenna, now you've got arrows, so you've got everything. So it is actually possible to get kind of the super ultimate detector. That said, everything does have a compromise, and that package is nearly $3,600 if you use my 10% off coupon. Otherwise, it's like close to $4,000. So, yes, you can get kind of the super ultimate detector, but that's a very pricey package, and I get it. Not everybody wants to drop $3,600 on a radar detector, So everything has a compromise, whether it's performance, whether it's false alert filtering. I mean, everything has some trade-off, And that's kind of the inevitable quest, is everybody wants the best detector out there for a reasonable price that's got all the bells and whistles and the best range and the best false filtering without having to make compromises. Like, every detector is in one way or another a compromise. No exception. Everything has its pros and cons. And hopefully one day we'll see a cross between the Redline and its performance and the Max360 with all of its kind of plug and play, ease of use, false alert filtering and fancy display and arrows, like all the bells and whistles wrapped around a mediocre performing radar detector, right? I want all the bells and whistles wrapped around a really well performing detector. Sounds like Escort's not interested because, number one, it would be too large, and number two, it would just be too expensive and it wouldn't make sense from a business standpoint. So, yeah, there you go. For those of you guys who are wondering about the kind of the Redline360, the mythical super detector that would come out, I would love to see it. Tons of requests. I think it's an obvious no-brainer, but at the same time, it kind of has to be balanced with, technically, how feasible would it be with this platform? And from a business perspective, does it make sense or not? So, fingers crossed. I hope somebody produces it one day. Maybe Radenso would do it since they have this smaller detector and, the patent is expired in the arrows. Maybe they could do it. Maybe Uniden would want to do it someday. They're getting the performance up there, and if they want to continue developing these detectors and, they're kind of a game changer with their new Uniden detectors in terms of performance. Again, it has to be sold at a reasonable price point for them to make money too. But at the same time, it's doable, and I really hope somebody does it. I don't see anybody creating it right now, just in terms of what I've heard. You know, I haven't heard of any sort of development units, but if somebody was to do that, that would be phenomenal. So anybody who wants to do it, I will cheer you on. Please do it. That would be fantastic. So yeah, there you go. So there you go. There's the take on kind of the Redline 360 and what all is involved there. So cool. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.